That background is Harlan, correct?
That background is in Harlan County. It's in Lynch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's tough over in parts of Eastern Kentucky right now.
So most of the people on here are from Kentucky?
A lot of them are. Yeah. A lot of coworkers. And then we've got a couple of research fellows. Hello, guys. That have hopped on.
Okay.
All right. Well, if you are ready, we may have some other folks that hop on here in a sec, but I'll go ahead and get started. Keep an eye on that. All right, guys. So, excited to see everyone today. I'm Stephanie Lang. I'm the editor of the Register of the Kentucky Historical Society, and we're really happy to have you with us for the August First Friday here at KHS. So just quick Zoom etiquette reminders. Please keep your microphone turned off. You're welcome to turn on your camera. We would love to see your smiling faces if you would like to do that. And if you have any kind of questions or comments throughout the program, feel free to use the chat button, and I'll go over those at the very end. And if you have a question, I'll make sure that those are part of the Q&A following the program. And as always, this is a space for learning and conversation. So please keep all comments kind and respectful towards the presenter, the host, and other participants. Couple of upcoming events that are going to be happening at KHS that I want to tell you all about. The August 20th Tipsy Town Tales is sold out, but there are still spaces open for September. This is a very popular program. It's a lot of fun and they sell out fast. So reserve your spot today. There will be Women's Equality Day activities on August the 27th. Feel free to check our website for more details. Registration is also live for fall camp. I cannot believe it's fall, but fall camp and no school day camp. And we encourage parents to sign up early so they can ensure a spot. Next month, for our September First Friday speaker, Dr. Alistine Turley will be presenting her research, research on her new book, The Gospel of Freedom, Black Evangelicals and the Underground Railroad. So definitely looking forward to that. One small thing before I introduce our speaker, I do want to take a moment, since we are talking about Appalachia, to recognize all of the families who have been impacted by the devastated floods. They are certainly in our thoughts and prayers. And if you want and you are so inclined to help, the governor has set up a Team Kentucky Flood Relief Fund. You can visit that website, the governor's website, or KHS social media for some of those links. So I am excited to introduce today our speaker, Dr. William Turner, who is joining us all the way from Texas. Dr. Turner is going to be sharing from his award-winning book, The Harlan Renaissance, Stories of Black Life in Appalachia Coal Towns. So I do have a copy of the book here that we have in our library. This is a topic he has firsthand knowledge of, having grown up in the town of Lynch, Kentucky, in a mining family, like so many of us. Dr. Turner graduated from the University of Kentucky with a degree in sociology before going on to get a master's and a Ph.D. from Notre Dame University. Additionally, he completed a postdoc study at the University of Pennsylvania and at Duke University, and served for over a decade as research assistant to Alex Haley, the author of Roots. Dr. Turner had a long and distinguished career in academia, serving on the faculty of Winston-Salem University, Kentucky State, Berea College, also in Kentucky, Prairie View A&M University. He is best known for his groundbreaking research on African-American communities in Appalachia, but he's also spent time studying economic systems and social structures in the urban South and Latino communities in the Southwest. 2021 was a very busy year for Dr. Turner. His alma mater, the University of Kentucky, honored him with induction into the College of Arts and Sciences Hall of Fame. Congratulations on that. That is wonderful. And of course, 2021 was also when he published Harlan Renaissance, which then received the Weatherford Award for Nonfiction, as well as the Individual Mountain Heritage Award. Again, congratulations. That's wonderful. Dr. Turner, we are happy to have you here, so go ahead and take it away.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Lang. Thanks everybody for coming on to this, and I hope that we have a good conversation. As Stephanie said, I'm a long way from where you guys are. I retired from Berea College a dozen years ago. When I was professor of Black and Appalachian Studies. And my wife and I decided to cut out the middle people, the airlines and the banks, where we were sending our greetings and our resources to our grandchildren in Texas. So we up and moved to Houston about 10 years ago. However, I'm back and forth in the mountains of the South a lot. I want to start by saying that I wouldn't be interested, I don't think, to the extent that I became in this subject that has become my life's work, had it not been for one of my teachers at the University of Kentucky, whom I met in 1966, roughly 55 years ago, a guy named Dr. John Bell Stevenson. John, in 1984, became the president of Berea College, but we go back to 1966. In fact, John introduced me to a person who was singularly responsible for the growth of the Kentucky Historical Society, and that was Dr. Tom Clark. John introduced me to Tom Clark when I was picketing and otherwise raising hell around the University of Kentucky when I was 20 years old, because I didn't know any better. And I was 20 years old 55 years ago. And we wanted at the University of Kentucky to offer courses in Black history. We wanted the history department to offer courses in Black Kentucky history, and they were not interested in it. They were not interested. Skip very quickly to my relationship to another Kentucky Historical Society luminary, and that's Jim Clotter. Dr. Clotter and I go back a long, long way. And then I would skip immediately to another historian, these three historians I mentioned now, Tom Clark, Jim Clotter, and another one I've mentioned, of course, whom I talk to all the time, is named Joel Smith. Joel Smith at the University of Kentucky, Dr. Smith, is doing a book right now, another book on Kentucky history. Of course, he did the Kentucky African American Encyclopedia, but he's now doing one on my old Kentucky home. So I'm pretty much rooted in Kentucky. God willing, the creek don't rise. When I finish talking to you all, I'm gonna go to the airport here in Houston, and I'm gonna fly to Knoxville, Tennessee this afternoon and pick up a car. I'm gonna drive to Letcher County to see my friends at Appalachia, to see some people I know in Jenkins and Wheelwright and Hazard who've been inundated. Last week, I partnered with the Christian Appalachian Project, which is located down around Renfro Valley. And I was able to donate some copies of my book, this Harlan Renaissance, that we're offering for people who will make a contribution to the flood relief through the Christian Appalachian Project, will receive a signed copy of my book. So that's my little commercial spiel for the morning. Now, let me see if I can share my screen, if that works. The host needs to let me share my screen. Is that okay? It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Try it now, see if that gets it.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Oh yeah, there it is. Okay, can everybody see that? Do you see it, Stephanie? My screen is up?
Yes.
Okay, good. I want to say that I had another freshened copy of what I'm going to do this shows something about, well, it'll work. Very quickly, let's see if I can go to my second slide. And it should look like this. Who am I and what do I know about the past, the present, and maybe even the future of Blacks in Appalachia? On the left is a picture of my father and his paycheck from the December of 1946, when I was 6 months old. My father brought home $45.70 that week after working in the mine in Lynch for about 80 hours. So my father was a native of Wise County, Virginia, which is over the mountain from Harlan County, as we say, near a little town called Appalachia, the only town in the South, Appalachia, Virginia. My father was born near there. My great-grandmother on my father's side was born in Lee County, Virginia in 1857. So we go back a long way in these mountains. And that picture on the right is on the cover of my book, and I'm the person with the red arrow above his head. Those are my 4 older siblings. Our mother had 3 more children, my 3 younger brothers. Then my mother and my father adopted the sons of the 2 girls on the left, my oldest sister, God rest her soul, and my next oldest sister, who's now our oldest sibling, Marie. Marie is 80 years old. And so my dad and mom adopted their sons. So really the 10 of us grew up together. My nephews, the sons of Marie and Peggy, always called them Peggy and Marie. They called mom and dad, because that's who raised them. So here's what my work is about. It's a little bit about that statement from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow that people, the lives of great people all remind us, and we can make our lives sublime, because when they leave us, they leave their footprints. So I've tried to trace the footprints of Black people in the mountains of the South. Who were these people? Where did they come from? What did they do while they were in the mountains of the South? What did they contribute? What happened to them? And so one of the persons I took my work from is that man right there, whose name is Carter G. Woodson, who went to Berea College and graduated from Berea in 1903. Dr. Woodson became known as the founder of Black History Month. He worked in a coal mine around Huntington, south of Huntington, West Virginia, and he started the Association for the Study of African American Life and History in 1915. And Dr. Woodson, as I said a moment ago, graduated from Berea College. And you'll hear me say Berea over and over again. Here's some people that taught me along the way. On the left is what I think is the most preeminent historian, Black or white, who ever lived, was John Hope Franklin. He and Dr. Thomas Clark were very good friends. Dr. Franklin became a friend of mine. I learned a lot about the footprints of people in the mountains of the South through my relationship with Alex Haley, the author of Roots in 1976. Alex had earlier written a classic book called The Autobiography of Malcolm X. I used to hang around a lot with Alex. So what about these footprints in the sand of time? And before going into this history in Appalachia, and that photograph right there is a picture of what I saw every morning when I walked out of our house to go to school. That's Black Mountain in Harlan County, the highest peak in Kentucky. And that was the scene from our front porch that I looked at every day. And I'll be standing on that front porch tomorrow when I go through Lynch, rather on Sunday, having gone to Jenkins in that area. So let's see where we can go. Remember, there was slavery in the hills. Probably the largest slaveholding county in eastern Kentucky was Clay County, down around Manchester, where my good friend Aaron Thompson, the head of the Council on Post-Secondary Education, is from Clay County, Kentucky, Manchester. So we've studied about these footprints a lot. And we know, for example, that that famous Kentuckian Abraham Lincoln was a little bit torn over slavery. But we have to remember the young Lincoln spoke and acted like most white people of his day. He did not believe in, nor did he speak about the equality of Blacks and white. Lincoln wanted to send Black people back to Africa. He thought that they would just be a burr in the saddle of Kentucky's horse. And his idea was, let's send them all back to Africa. So let's, before I digress anymore, let's talk about my work. There's my work there in that white space, surrounded by the blue spaces, are what you call the counties of the 13 states of the Appalachian region, as determined by the Appalachian Regional Commission in Washington, D.C. The current federal co-chair is Ms. Gail Manchin. And so you see that's Birmingham in Appalachia, there's Tupelo in Mississippi, the Tri-Cities of Tennessee, Knoxville. At one time, Winston-Salem was in it, but there's Appalachia, Hagerstown, Charleston, Ironton, and the largest city in the northern section of Appalachia is called Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But you can also go to Vassar College this morning because that county in Poughkeepsie, New York is considered an Appalachian county. 432 counties, 13 states, almost 28 million people, about 3.5 million of whom are Black. In 1967, through Tom Ford at the University of Kentucky, a book was published that became the, besides Harry Caudle's book called Night Comes to the Cumberlands. At Kentucky in 1967, they wrote a book called The Southern Appalachian Region, about which they wrote the following, Tom Ford. The number of Negroes in the Appalachian region is such a small proportion of the total population that the social consequences of their presence is of no significance. That's what they essentially said about Black people in Appalachia. If I can fast forward again, if you see all the graphics and the visuals that have come out of Eastern Kentucky in the last couple of weeks on the flooding, you would think there are still no Black people in Appalachia, but there's a lot of Black people in Hazard and in Wheelwright and in Jenkins and in Pikeville and in Harlan and Middlesboro and Barbersville and Pineville to this very moment. I got tired of hearing that in 1985, so we published a book called Blacks in Appalachia. Me and a guy named Ed Cabell, God rest his soul. That book was published by the University Press of Kentucky 38 years ago. John Stevenson, whom I mentioned earlier, asked me one time if I would devote my life to the study of African Americans in Appalachia, because he told me in 1966, gee, I never met any Black people from Harlan County, Kentucky, and I don't think most people have. So you need to dedicate your life to that. And I looked him square in the eye and said, oh no, I would never dedicate my life to studying about Blacks in Appalachia, because I've been studying about whites in Appalachia. And they were described as follows: banjo playing, coal mining, family feuding, Scotch-Irish hillbillies who toted guns, who were incestuous, moonshining, ornery, semi-illiterate, toothless people. That's what they said about whites in the mountains of the South. Most recently was said by J.D. Vance in his book called Hillbilly Elegy. They were isolated out of the mainstream. They handled snakes. They were Christian fundamentalist racists. Y'all remember a movie called Deliverance 50 years ago, one of the most famous movies that made Burt Reynolds famous, denigrated white people in the mountains of the South. So I didn't want to have anything to do with writing about that because it would come off as though Black people were just little Black virgins, if you will. So that's my work. So I'm about Blacks in Central Appalachian coal camps inside that circle, those coal camps of Eastern Kentucky. There's Kentucky's Appalachian counties. I think it's about 54 of them out of Kentucky's 120 so counties. The Appalachian counties are split primarily by Interstate 75 going north and south, and that's where you go. Who were these people? How'd they get to the mountains? Where did they come from? What did they do? What was life like for them? What did they contribute? What were their life ways? Why did they leave? Where did they go? And what is life like for Black people who continue to live in the region today? That's the essence of my book. That's what I tried to write about. So where they come from, the Black people of Eastern Kentucky, in Letcher County, and Berea County, and Knox County, and Wolfe County, Harlan County, Letcher County, Floyd County, Perry County. They came primarily in the 1880s up to about the 1940s. They came from in and around Birmingham. 90% of the ones who came to be the first Black coal miners in the mountains of the South in Eastern Kentucky, they came from Jefferson County, Alabama. They came from Talladega. They came from Huntsville. They came from Scottsville. They came right up through the Cumberland Gap around Middlesboro and Tazewell, Tennessee, and the Cumberland Gap, where Tennessee and Kentucky and Virginia come together. And they went into southeastern Kentucky to work in the coal mines, but the great majority of them continued on over the mountains into southern West Virginia. the largest population of Blacks still in the mountains of the South. They live in Keystone, and they live in Gary, and they live in Welch, and they live in Beckley, and they live in Bluefield and southern West Virginia. Here are the co-camps: Barbersville, Benham, Cumberland, East Bernstead, Everett, Harlan, Hazard, Jenkins, Lynch, McRoberts, Middlesboro, Pineville, Wheelwright. But to a greater extent, they're in Morristown and Rogersville and Knoxville and Bristol and Kingsport and Abingdon, Virginia, and Big Stone and Bluefield and Stoneacre. And I pointed out the West Virginia places a minute ago. That's where they are to this very day. That's where I'm going tomorrow, God willing. So they all came from the, descendants of African slaves. They migrated seeking labor, wage labor, beginning in the 1800s. The people in my life, my family, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, their numbers grew precipitously from virtually no Black people in the mountains of the South in the late 1880s, because slavery was not a big industry in Eastern Kentucky. But by 1900, there were almost 300,000 people working in the coal mines of Eastern Kentucky and southern West Virginia. And these Blacks had already worked in the coal mines around Birmingham, Alabama. They were hardworking. They had the same values of white Appalachians, and that is, they believed first in the primacy of their families. Religion was and still is very strong. Schooling was emphasized. Very neighborly and community spirit people who were actively involved in their communities. Patriotism, sense of humor, sense of humility, honest people, neighborly people. That describes everybody that's underwater in Letcher County this morning. That is still the main value system written about by my teacher, Loyal Jones, who was for so long at Berea College. There's a Lynch colored school in 1924, the year my mother was born. My mother went to that school. All of my brothers and sisters went to that school. That school still stands. Most of the teachers in that school and the schools of Hazard and Jenkins and Middlesboro and Harlan and Benham and Wheelwright and Pineville, they graduated from the Kentucky State College for Negroes, now known as Kentucky State University, where I had the pleasure of being the interim president for a while there. So 90% of those who graduated from these schools attended and graduated from Kentucky State during that same period of time. That's the Lynch Colored School, 1924. That building still stands. And coal and steel, that was our roots. And one of the most important industrialists in American history was a man named Andrew Carnegie. Mr. Carnegie owned United States Steel, which bought 18,000 acres in Harlan County in 1915, and he built a little town called Benham, Kentucky. And then a couple of years later, United States Steel, then the world's largest corporation, incorporated Lynch, Kentucky. And there's my school, the Lynch Colored School. They did not own property. They could not own property because the company owned the whole town, lock, stock, and barrel. Our towns, the towns I mentioned, were highly segregated and highly regulated. The colored schools and the churches were provided by the companies. And I use the word colored because I know most of you young folks on that think that's a kind of sick word, but the fact of the matter, it is still etched in the concrete of my school. It was called the Lynch Colored School. They let us know we were colored every day for 100 years, and it's still there. If you were laid off from your job, you had to move out of your company house because the company owned it. We lived by company rules. We saw by company lights. We drank company water, and the company hired preachers who taught us what was right. The company ran everything. And then mechanization came along, and we all had to move out of those little places. That's the neighborhood in Lynch, Kentucky. The guy who's running, a man named Charles Booker, who's running for Senate there in Kentucky, he has a tagline that goes from the holler to the hood. Well, in 1990, I took that picture there on the right, down the street from where I grew up, and I called that picture from the holler to the hood. And so, because we had hoods in the hollers, Black people lived up in these little places. There's a school called the Benham Colored School. You can't see it too well there, but as you can see, it sits right in the folds of the mountains of Benham, Kentucky, right next to Lynch. And my mother was born about 100 yards to the left of that arrow, where we have a very notable boy, young man. He's now 80 years old or so, named Bernard Bickerstaff. Bernie went to that school, and Bernie has been a coach and an executive with the National Basketball Association for the last 45 years. Bernie coached the Lakers, he coached the Supersonics, he coached the Charlotte Hornets, he coached, his son is now the coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Bernie went to that little school. His granddaddy and grandmama raised him. Bernie was a basketball player. There's Portal 31 for any of you all who want to go in that, on that device there. It'll take you back in there about 5 miles right now. It's called Portal 31. It's a tourist site now, a kind of Disney animated ride. You can go back in there and see how mining was in the early days when my grandparents came there. There are some Black men that my papa worked with. I knew every one of those men. When that picture was taken, those 8 or 10 men had 54 children between them, and they all worked very hard every day. There, once again, is a Lynch colored school that I attended. It was an excellent segregated school. That church on my right, and yours too, I guess, that's called the Rising Star Baptist Church in Benham, Kentucky. My mother played piano in that church until she wore the ivy off the keys. From the time she was 13 until she was 63, she played piano in that little church. There's what ran most of the men out of the coal mines that I write about in my book. It's called a continuous miner. At one point in 1969, I was working, 68 rather, I was just out of UK. I worked for the Kentucky Commission on Human Rights, which is run by a man named Galen Martin, also a Berea grad. And Galen convinced me to convince my father and some other Black men to sue United States Steel because they would not give Black men jobs running machines like that. That machine, when my father knows me and won that lawsuit against US Steel, my father got to operate one of those machines. But I remember so well when he came home the first day, he said, you know, I'm gonna make $125 a day now running this damn machine. He said, but the problem is it's gonna put 125 boys out of work because that was the machine. And thus the populations declined precipitously. See the line from 1940 when there were 71,000 people in Pike County alone. And now, particularly with the Black population, there are more people in the neighborhood I live in here in Houston than in all of Pike County right now, and certainly for the Black population. Same with mountaintop Black people removal in Harlan County. There you see, this morning, there are less than 500 people, period, in Lynch, Kentucky. But when I was born there 75 years ago, there were 12,000 people in that little town from all parts of the world. They were from Italy, they were from Ukraine, they were from Yugoslavia, they were from all over Eastern Europe, they were from Spain. I went to high school with a boy named Marcus Camacho, whose family had come out of Chiapas, Mexico. So I grew up in a very diverse town. In 1948, Lynch, Kentucky had 38 different nationalities. Lexington, Kentucky has never had 38 different nationalities, but we grew up in a town like that. Right now, mountaintop removal is the way they get the coal out of the mountain. My dad was displaced. My brother was displaced by what you see there. And I would go so far as to say that mountaintop removal may be singularly responsible for the inundation of the flooding in Eastern Kentucky this morning, because they took all the trees off the top of the mountain when they stripped them, and then they dug the top of the mountain off. They blew the top of the mountains off, called mountaintop removal. So where do you think is the rain's gonna go when it rains? They stopped up all the creeks, they stopped up half the rivers, and then when it rains, there's no way for the water to go into the valleys where the people live. It was predictable. Well, the Black people migrated out starting around the time I was 5 years old. Black people and white people too started leaving the mountains because mechanization had displaced all of them. In fact, for a while there's a town near Detroit called Ypsilanti, Michigan. They started calling it, 50 years ago, they started calling it Ypsilanti because everybody from Pikeville and Pineville and Harlan and Jenkins and Lynch and Benham and Cumberland and all of those towns, they left 50 years ago. And they moved to Columbus, they moved to Cleveland, they moved to Cincinnati, they moved to Fort Wayne, they moved to Detroit, or rather they moved to Detroit up the Hillbilly Highway. In fact, there's an old joke that says a man died and went from hazard to heaven, and St. Peter met him at the gate, and he saw a lot of people in some cages that could not move around. He asked St. Peter, Who are those people back there, all boarded up and they can't get out? And St. Peter said, oh, those are people here in heaven who are from Eastern Kentucky, and we have to lock them up every Friday because they all want to go home every weekend. That's Eastern Kentucky in heaven. So the banjo, blacks, as you know, the banjo, which is the most iconic instrument in country and Western music, was brought to the mountains of the South by slaves. Oh, brother, where art thou? Shape note singing. All of that can be traced to the contributions of people like Carter G. Woodson, Booker T. Washington, Bill Withers, all these people in West Virginia, the steel driver man, John Henry. John Fee was the first major abolitionist, and John Fee founded Berea College. And when he founded it, 90% of the students at Berea College in 1858 were Black students. They had come from right there in south of Lexington, where slaves were refugees. So I'm ending up now with the fact that if you follow the footprints, you will see that the nature of life of Blacks in these former coal towns today is exceptionally high unemployment. They live in a space where there are a lot of alt-right politics. The ravages of methamphetamine and heroin and opioids affects the Black people of hazard just as it does the white people. And much of Appalachia is still the other America. So as I said earlier, the corporate powers in those towns were summed up by that famous poet Carl Sandburg, who wrote in 1930, you live in a company house, you go to a company school, you work for a company according to the company rules. You drink company water, and we all use company lights, and the company preacher teaches us what the company said was right. A lot of paternalism. So what happens when these companies leave, when there is no work? What happens to the community? Who cares about these people, about their children? But no matter what you take from them, you can't take away their pride, because that's what we see. I did this presentation a few years ago at Union College, but it still counts. I want to thank y'all. And I'll stop with the formal presentation if I know how to unshare my screen. Let's see how it works. Did that work? Yeah, boy. All right. So, Stephanie, what we can do is if anybody of the participants would like to pursue any specific questions about what I've said in terms of that visual, I'm very happy to take any questions.
Sure. Cynthia, go ahead.
Thank you. That was a fabulous presentation. I really, really learned a lot. I wanted to ask a question about, you said that the company hired the preachers. Could you say a little more about that? I'm working on a project on AME church women and another project on what was called the Negro Chautauqua movement, which there was a huge base of that in Bluefield. And so those are kind of two-part questions. So how did that work with the company hiring the ministers? And was that true of all denominations or only certain denominations?
It was true. It was to a lesser extent with the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. As we used to say, the difference between a Baptist and a Methodist, the Methodists went to college. I'm very serious. In the coal towns that were owned by these companies, Cynthia, you have to know, I live in a relatively, right around the corner from me is a gated neighborhood. All the houses cost $500,000. You can't go into that neighborhood unless you have the combination to a gate. Lynch, Kentucky, when it came online in 1917, at the state-owned highway that entered Lynch, US 119, there was a gatehouse where you had to stop, and the man would say, "What is your business in this town?" Okay, they did not. They wanted a stable workforce that they controlled, essentially, from beginning to end. So Harlan County, Kentucky had its share. There were 55 coal camps alone in Harlan County, all controlled by companies who own the police forces. Let me give you the best case. The most important thing in life in America is money. Coal camps were not only self-contained, they printed their own money. It was called script. And so people were paid in this money that was not US currency, but it was, you could only spend it in the company-owned store. When the First Baptist Missionary Church got ready to hire a preacher, they had to go to the company, the boss they called him. He was the superintendent of the mining work, which was really controlled out of Pittsburgh. My father worked for United States Steel. His check came each month from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He hated the Pittsburgh Steelers football team because he said they pay those boys more money to play football in one day than they pay me in 5 years. He hated them. So that they would take the potential preacher and sit with the coal company superintendent and the other bosses, and they would grill this person to make sure he was not a union rebel rouser or someone who might come and preach the gospel that said, you know, you shouldn't be doing this and you shouldn't be doing that. So these towns were uniformly controlled. I try to point out it in my book that we see the equivalent now. If you will go to parts of California around what we call the Silicon Valley, you can work for Google in Mountain City and never leave the campus because they have housing there, they have food there, cafeterias, they have stores, they have kindergarten, they have high schools, they have everything right in that self-contained community. And so you can be born there, you can die there and never leave the town. And it was the same way in Harlan County where I grew up. The company provided the graveyard and the hospital in which you were born. I tell people rather jokingly that I may be the only person I know anyway. I was born in the company hospital, and the company had partnered with the Catholic Diocese of Covington to open the hospital in which I was born in 1925, and it was called the Hospital of Notre Dame in Lynch, Kentucky. I was born in the Hospital of Notre Dame, and I was so happy 26 years later, when my mother and my father came to the University of Notre Dame to watch me graduate. Oh boy, somebody's ringing my doorbell and my wife isn't here. I guess they'll go away.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that information.
Thank you.
See Kelly, she is one of our research fellows. She's I learned much that would benefit my students. I would like to share some of the data from the slides with students in my African American history class. So wonderful. Who else has questions?
Is there a question in the chat or what?
Julie has a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. I've been wondering about the interrelationships between the African American community and also immigrants that came in and the relationship between those people.
I have a chapter in my book. I think the title is Everybody's Black Inside a Coal Mine. Yep. But not so much when they come out. Okay, because the company built the houses in such a way that the social dynamics were equivalent to the social dynamics in the most racially segregated part of Mississippi. You know, Black people lived in their communities, white people lived in their communities. Our fathers worked together every day, but outside the mine, when they went into a bathhouse, there were bathhouses that the coal miners went to. Well, there was a white side of the bathhouse and there was a black side of the bathhouse. Okay, so yes, we knew the Vicinis, we knew the Yablonskis, we knew the Portellis, we knew the people who were Melungeons, the Isums, we knew them, but we had the Lynch Colored School. They had the Lynch School. It did not have white in it, but we knew it was a white school. They integrated it my senior year. I graduated from the Lynch White School, we called it. Now, give you the illustration of the dynamics. When the two schools were combined, guess when they had two teachers we had a chemistry teacher in the Lynch Colored School, and there was a chemistry teacher in the Lynch white school. When they integrated, guess which teacher got the chemistry teaching job? We had a black principal who had a master's degree, and they had a white principal who had a bachelor's degree. When they combined the two schools, the black principal was 49, the white principal was 27. Guess who became the principal of the combined schools? Jack Isaacs, who became a good friend of mine. His daughter, Susan, is recently retired executive from UK. When we integrated the schools, the high school prom is a singular rite of passage, as everybody knows. Well, for the first time in the history of Lynch in 1963, when they integrated schools, the school board decided they did not think it would be good to have a senior prom because that might lead to race mixing. And someone once said, sex can lead to slow dancing. So not only did was I denied a high school prom, which used to be a big event for the Black people, but they cut it out my senior year. Not only that, every year the high schools would go on a high school trip, senior trip. I get everybody on there went to a senior trip. Well, they did not have one the year I graduated because the all-white school board decided, well, we better not mix these kids like that. We don't know what will happen. So I would quickly add, though, that there were great personal relationships between Black and white people as individuals, but there were no public spaces, just as there are very many public spaces now, what you might call a canopy where everybody, Black, white, Mexican, whatever their ethnic group might be, where they come under that umbrella. That doesn't happen in Philadelphia today. So you see, we're still largely in the same historical space that we were a long time ago. I know it sounds corny, but I know when I get to Letcher County tomorrow, I'm working with an organization that's trying to get some resources in for flood relief. And I want to make sure that you all don't leave out the Black people in these hollers with this relief money, with this relief help. So working with some Black churches through the Christian Appalachian Project, which is a largely white organization. But as you know, as Martin Luther King said many, many years ago, if you want to go to the most segregated hour in America, go to church on a Sunday. Yeah, yes. That's the most segregated hour in America. It'll be 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. So that was the way it was when I was growing up. However, my grandmother was a bootlegger. My grandmother had all kind of people who would come into her house to buy homebrew, to buy beer, to buy moonshine, buy the drink. And of course, the man who supplied her moonshine was a white man, and he was at her house more than my granddad was most of the time. So I saw white people in my grandmama's house all the time. I went with my father, who was a handyman who did wallpaper and plumbing and painting and carpentry work after his work hours. And Dad did work in white people's homes, but we didn't get to go. I would go with my father, but I wasn't welcome to go into those neighborhoods. At least I didn't feel welcome. You have to remember, I grew up not too far from what we used to call the sundown town capital of Kentucky. It was called Corbin. In 1919, there was a major conflagration, a racial riot, where all of the Black people were run out of Corbin overnight, October the 29th, 1919. And 1921, I'm sorry. So you go through Corbin right now, you get off at exit 25 or 29 or something like that on I-75. I still don't stop in Corbin because it was the first place when I was a little boy. I remember seeing a sign in a service station that said, if you'll excuse this phrase, it said, no dogs, no Jews, no niggers. Corbin, Kentucky. Saw it with my own eyes. And as you know, the Sun Up initiative in Corbin, run by some people out of UK, Catherine's name won't come to me right now, but people are trying to do much better in terms of race relations in the mountains of the South. And let me mention very quickly, on US 15 between Whitesburg and Hazard, is a little town called Red Fox, Kentucky. Red Fox, Kentucky had integrated churches in the 1850s. A Black man who had been a slave was freed, and he founded the Little Home Old Regular Baptist Church. And so, as you also might know, there is a long history of interracial mixing, you might call it, in Perry County, because there was a governor named Bert T. Combs. There's some Black Combses in Perry County and some white Combses in Perry County. They go back a long way. There's a family named Olinger in Perry County, into which my brother is married. There were white Olingers and Black Olingers. But as we all know, everybody Black in the United States whose last name is Washington can trace their roots back to a certain president of the United States. George Washington had 400 slaves. Thomas Jefferson, the father of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, he had 600 slaves. And in fact, he was so close to his slaves that one of the slave women, a 14-year-old girl named Sally Hemings, he took her as his concubine when he was 44 years old. And they had 7 children together. So let's not flip the script and forget that beneath the surface of this segregation and this apartheid, there has always been coming together of people, if you will. Oh boy, that was a soapbox.
Thank you.
I think Emily's got a question. Hi, Emily.
Hey, Emily. What's your question?
I can't hear you. You might have to type it into the chat.
I think she must be maxed and muted.
It's the joys of Zoom. And Emily is another one of our research fellows.
Oh, okay.
Can you speak to your experience in the segregated elementary school you attended?
Oh, no problem. I went to the Lynch Colored School. As I said earlier, my mother, who would be 100 years old next year, went to the Lynch Colored School. She went there in 1930, I think. Now, my experience was extraordinary. In my book, there's a section about the nature of the schooling. The schooling of African Americans in the coal camps of the South, in West Virginia, in Southwest Virginia, in East Tennessee, in Southern West Virginia, they were all pretty much alike. They were based on a model that was developed by perhaps what I would think indisputably might have been the most powerful African American to ever live was not Barack Obama. It was not Martin Luther King Jr. It was a man named Booker T. Washington. Everywhere you see a Washington High School, it was named after this man. Booker T was a West Virginia, a coal miner out of Malden, West Virginia, and he went to college at Hampton Institute in Virginia, and he left there and he moved into Tuskegee, Alabama, where he founded a school called Tuskegee Institute, which is today Tuskegee University. That place was supported by the Rockefeller family, another rich industrial family in American history. When Booker T spread his framework about how we should operate, he knew that Black people needed to have economic empowerment. And so he partnered with a Jewish man named Julius Rosenwald. And they together put up about 4,800 schools, 4,800 schools throughout the South. And they were explicitly for the education of Blacks because white municipalities, white states did not support Black public schools. And Booker T. Washington put these schools together. And so I have a section in my book about the quality of school because it was based on discipline, respect, and a number of, I wish I had my book in front of me because I'm not able to just rattle it off my head like I should be able to. But I was taught by disciplinarians who believed that that we were all somehow miniature representations of our race. You carried this burden around that these teachers taught you. Bill, if you're going to be on the Kentucky Historical Society website this morning, wear a shirt and a tie, because, and you know, by the way, I have some shorts on because I knew you just see but my teachers, God rest their souls, they wanted us to always to show our best, because somehow our behavior tended to reflect on all of the Black people. And so they taught us the 3 R's, but one of those was respect. It wasn't just reading and writing and arithmetic, but it was also self-respect. And they taught us that, yes, you can be born into a cold camp and all of whatever that culture means, but this cold camp does not have to determine your fate. If you would come up with the right personal response, you can become something. And it was drilled into us every day. One of the ways it was drilled into us, which was nonverbal, was when you walked into the Lynch Colored School in 1952, when I did. On the walls on both sides of the main corridor, on the first floor, were photographs of iconic Black high achievers from religion and sports and education and philosophy and music and drama. Booker T. Washington, Mary McLeod Bethune, whom they just unveiled a statue in Washington recently. So we saw Marian Anderson. We saw pictures of Ralph J. Bunch. There were photographs of Marcus Garvey and Frederick Douglass, and we had to recite Frederick Douglass's "What to the Slave is the 4th of July," and we had to learn poetry by James Weldon Johnson. So we went to a very highly our teachers. One way to look at it is this: in the 1940s and 1950s and 1930s, the only thing Black women could do was teach, because they were not allowed in other professions. So the smartest Black women were at the Lynch Colored School. They were at the Benham Colored School. They were at the Harlan Colored School. And then let's fast forward to the 1960s, when my wife, who was training to be a teacher, my wife studied math, and she was walking through a job fair one day in 1968, when she was 21 years old, and she had a math book. And one of the recruiters says, "Come here, young lady, I'd like to talk to you." And he said, "I see this math book. You study math?" And she said, "Yes." He said, "You know, where are you headed?" She said, "I'm going to do my student teacher. I'm going to be a teacher." She was going to teach at a colored school. Well, he said, "Oh, let me tell you, you should let us hire you, and we can train you to be a systems engineer at International Business Machines." And they moved her to Lexington, Kentucky. IBM came to Lexington, and now it's called Lexmart. But 50 years ago, my wife got a job for $16,000 working for IBM in Lexington as a systems engineer, writing code in Cobalt and Fortran, back when you had these punch cards, you see. And so there went Black women in teaching, you see. So my wife was in the first cohort of Blacks in the 1960s, after the Civil Rights Act of 1965, after Sherner and Goodman and Cheney were, I think that was yesterday, we observed those 3 young men who were found buried in Mississippi. So a lot of things happened in the 1960s that changed, you know, the educational system became integrated. However, let us not be confused. The college-going rate of Blacks went down precipitously after integration. You would have figured it would have gone up, but it went down. And in fact, you could probably go out Franklin County, Kentucky, Fayette County, Kentucky, Bourbon County, Kentucky, over there around Versailles and those places. Their biggest issue in the school system is what they call the achievement gap. That's what everybody talks about. This gap has been widening, just like the wealth gap, for the last 50 years. Why? Because integration became a one-way street. They got rid of all of the Black teachers. They were deprofessionalized. And at the same time they were being deprofessionalized, my wife, who taught our daughter, and our daughter is 53 with doctoral work from Temple University, our daughter went to Spelman College. So what happens now is that my daughter was least likely to teach high school she became a college professor. My daughter-in-law ended up going to MIT, and she got a master's degree in engineering from Clemson. She was not likely to become an 8th grade teacher in Versailles, Kentucky. So you see, these dynamics might explain more than we know that what happened in terms of integration, as it was called, really amounted to a kind of evisceration. It amounted to a kind of gutting of the Black community like it was a fat catfish. And now we're 50 years later, and we're reaping the results of mismanaged social policy. Nobody intended it, I don't think, but it's called the unintended consequences of poorly thought policy.
Cynthia just raised her hand. Go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to follow up on that about the 50 years and the continued systemic white supremacy in our culture. I'm wondering, given that, what gives you hope now? I mean, what causes you to be hopeful? Something about your grandchildren's, or what? What exactly drives your hope now?
I'm very happy to report I don't have it here in front of me, but if you all excuse me from my desk, I'll be right back.
I can't wait to see this.
Okay, excuse that. Can you see that?
Yes, yes.
Okay, that little girl is 2 days old. So I became a great grandfather 2 days ago. So I am an industrial strength optimist, despite how I may have sounded a few minutes ago. So now I have a 2-day-old, 3-day-old great granddaughter, and I'm sure everybody on here sometimes wishes that the current crisis of trust in our country is something that should worry us. We're really, and God, you got to remember, I used to think that the social politics and the social dynamics and indeed the racism of Kentucky was a real case. Well, I live in Houston, Texas. This is Kentucky on steroids. You know, yesterday here in Dallas, they had the Prime Minister of Turkey speaking to the, what's it called? It's a political action committee that's a meeting in Dallas this weekend.
CPAC.
Former President Trump's going to speak to him tomorrow. But
Yeah,
yesterday,
CPAC, yeah.
they're saying we should, the president of Turkey, I can't remember his name, but everything that we hoped wouldn't happen is in fact happening. You know, and those of us who see some of these as being anti-democratic, being anti-progressive, we're not speaking as loudly and as forcefully as we should be, because those who would have us go backwards, the white supremacists, the extremists, the anti-democratic, the people who are now, I mean, the president of Turkey is an autocrat. And when he is convincing people that we should be homophobic, convincing people that we should avoid race mixing, and all of these hyper extremist thinking. I mean, you got to remember, I grew up at the time of Barry Goldwater, who had a famous quote that said, extremism in the defense of democracy is not really extreme. So while I am hopeful about the life of my great granddaughter, who was born August the 3rd, 2022, I believe that Martin Luther King, when he quoted that statement that says, even though it may look rather gloom, the moral arm of the university still bends toward justice. I think that we still have a chance, because it's beyond individual human beings. The universe itself somehow forces us. It moves us in a way that says, that quote that I love so much from the motto of Berea College, I think it comes from the book of Acts 27, and it says, God hath made of one blood all peoples of the earth. God hath made of one blood all peoples of the earth. And so I have no other thing to believe except that we are moving in that direction. That despite the bumps in the road, despite the horrific attack on the Capitol, there are people who don't even think it happened. I was so happy yesterday when the ruling came out against that man who was arguing that people weren't killed in a school shooting at Sandy Hook, and they
Jones.
fined him $4 million yesterday.
Alex
That's
Jones.
justice.
Yeah,
Justice.
we need to
So,
see more justice like that.
we need to see more justice. Yesterday, I think they ruled a court. I think maybe the Department of Justice decided, let's go back and look at what happened to Breonna Taylor in Louisville. These things are very important. These things are very important. And so I'm an optimist because we had nothing else to be growing up in Harlan County, Kentucky, in such a marginalized place as I did in the 1950s. And none of my parents and my grandparents went beyond the 10th grade. Mama married daddy when she was 16. However, a few years ago, actually about 5 years ago, our older sister died, and she wanted to be buried near our parents in Cumberland, Kentucky. So we all came from all these places we lived. None of us live in Kentucky anymore. That virtual background behind me is just virtual in my mind. No Turner lives in that town anymore. But when all the cousins and the children and the grandchildren came together to bury our sister a few years ago, I have a nephew that said the prayer. His name is Justin Turner, my brother's child. Justin went to St. Aug High School in New Orleans, and then Justin went to Stanford on a scholarship, and then Justin got an MBA from Columbia, and Justin is I looked around, there was his brother who has a master's degree in international economics from the University of Kentucky Patterson School of Diploma. My son, one of my oldest sons, is a graduate of the University of Kentucky and a Morehouse College in Atlanta. He has a master's degree in architecture from Clemson. My daughter went to Spelman and a doctoral program at Clemson. I have three nieces, all of whom went to Hampton University in Virginia. And I'm thinking, if my father was standing here, I almost start crying every time I say this. Here we go. If my father and mother could have seen all those grandchildren and what has happened in their lives, they would be quite surprised. And we can't wait to see what's going to happen to this one.
Thank you so much. That was very inspirational. I'm going to think about that in my own grandchildren and hope that there's a better future for them all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. We just always tell them, shoot for the moon, and if you fail, you'll still be among the stars.
Yep.
That's what we got taught. I'm sure you all did too.
Well, I think on that very high note, I echo Cynthia. We're gonna wrap it up. Tom Jacek put in the chat. You'd mentioned the Rosenwald schools. The Kentucky Heritage Council published a book on those schools, 1917, 1932. For anybody else that's in. Oh, and he has a copy. Yes. If anybody else is interested, but
I'm gonna try.
What's that? Yeah. I dropped in the chat a link to Dr. Turner's book for those of you that would want to pick up a copy. I do recommend it. It is wonderful reading. And then there's more information on Dr. Turner in the chat as well. And thank you so much for that. If you all can join us, we'd love to have you next Friday or next September. Well, this September, I'd love to see you in September for First Friday. And yeah, everybody have a great day. Thank you.
I put my website in the chat. If anybody wants to copy down and contact me for any more discussion, that'll be fine with me. Just email me, and we can get to be friends, as they say.
Perfect.
And I'm in and out of Kentucky all the time. Like I said, I'll be in Kentucky on Sunday, and I'm scheduled to lecture at UK and EKU in Northern Kentucky and several other places in the fall. So I'll be in that neck of the woods, and y'all be good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. God bless y'all.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and when you're up this way in Kentucky, definitely if you've got a little bit of time to swing by, I'd love to talk to you. And if
Well, I'll
you're
definitely be coming to Frankfurt because I know I'm gonna, if I don't lecture at K-State, I'm gonna go there to visit my old friends. So I'll be in Frankfurt for a couple of days in October.
please come by and see us. I would love to meet you. I'm an Appalachian historian. I studied with Ron Eller before he retired.
Oh, Ron, I just talked to Ron. Yeah, I just talked to Ella yesterday. We fish together all the time.
Is he in North Carolina or is he back here in Kentucky?
Ron lives in Lexington. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he
He's
goes
good.
down. He goes to that cabin in North Carolina, and most of the
Right,
time,
he goes
I
down
don't
there
hear
like
from him.
this. Yeah, he goes to that cabin, and so he's just driving around to, the other side of New Circle Road somewhere.
Yeah.
But if you'll email me, I'm glad to send you his cell number. You can call it.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
you can tell him I gave you his number
yeah, he's
without even asking.
yeah, I adore him. He's wonderful. And I will say, safe travels if you are headed to if you are going to head over to Apple Shop and that way. There was a team including myself from KHS that went on Tuesday.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, I think we're supposed to get some more rain. I'm from Prestonsburg, so I'm actually going home myself
okay.
this weekend with a bunch of supplies. But several of my other coworkers who may still be on this call, they will tell you it's be careful traveling in that area. They're going to need a lot of help. And
well, maybe I'll get to stay at Jeannie Wiley State Park or something.
Maybe so. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
See you,
Have a good one.
Cynthia.